it's Danielle Radojcin and welcome to this episode of In Talks With. Nigel Cooke is a British artist who lives and works in Canterbury. Born in Manchester in 1973, he attended the Royal College of Arts and Goldsmiths, finding success straight out of university. Since 2014, he has been represented by the international gallery Pace, and over the years he's travelled and shown extensively, building up a comprehensive body of work, exploring figurative, sculptural and abstract forms. He's had major shows, including one in New York in 2015 and one in London in 2017. The intellectual rigour he brings to his work is reflected in his preoccupation with representing truth and the human mind. His most recent show at the Pace Gallery in Hanover Square in London, which runs until 7th of January, showcases his most recent work, a series of large, abstract colour canvases which appear like a chaotic mass of tangled fibres, with no apparent order, yet somehow appearing alive and full of movement and purpose. The effect is quite spellbinding, and I've noticed viewers standing in front of his work for a long time, absorbing their effect. Last month, I travelled to Nigel's studio in Canterbury, just ahead of the opening of his show and just ahead of his 50th birthday, to meet and talk with him about his work, his life, and how it's all intertwined. Nigel Cooke. Hi.
Hi.
Hello. So we're in your studio here in Canterbury, or just outside. It's an amazing space, beautifully designed by your wife, who's an architect.
That's right.
I was hoping to see some of your work, and there are some of your pieces hanging on the walls, but not the pieces that are going to be in the exhibition that we're sort of talking about primarily here.
Yeah, that's it. The paintings have already left to be installed in the gallery, but the ones that are here, they're kind of part of the same cycle. There's always, there's always a kind of body of work larger than the exhibition opportunity. And there's always something kind of remains that allows me to continue or build on once the show is over. Because obviously you don't really want the show to be a sort of terminus. It's always a sort of, there's a kind of handover period where the ideas become the next group, or you want to see where you left things and what part you're going to pursue for the next, probably about a year really, I suppose. Each group is about a year in length, a year and a half, and it's sort of like always an adventure, like where you go next is informed by how people respond to the show and how it looks to you when you install it, but also what it's like to live with the ones left when you're in the studio on your own afterwards.
Yeah, and also actually is it sort of a bit of almost, we were just talking about our kids, but that feeling when they leave home or something, it's almost like these things you've been working on for such a long time going out, and and then suddenly they're not there, and do you feel a sense of bereavement, or maybe that's a bit too strong, but some kind of absence?
Yeah, it's almost, well, it's more like a safety net goes away or something, because you kind of build a relationship with them over the months and years or whatever the time is between, and that you kind of. They sort of talk to each other, and you sort of, in a way, that paintings are possible. And when there's nothing, there's nothing to really guarantee that you can do anymore. It's sort of a strange thing to say. I've been painting for a long time. But there's always that doubt that you'll be able to do it, be able to kind of get something to work. And something being left is a bit of a reassurance. At the same time, what you say about them going is true too, because you lose your references to, I don't know, achievements or something. Like each painting has its own set of breakthroughs, and they accumulate in a group of paintings around you, and it sort of gives you a sort of a kind of family of things that mean something. And yeah, when that's gone. In one way, it is, an empty house has its advantages. You can sort of go anywhere. You're free, but then also you don't have the comforts of the familiar. So there's a bit of both, really. You kind of like, it's good to see that, you're not chained to what you've already done, but you can also, go off and try something else.
Yeah, and did you feel like you have proven to yourself with this latest body of work that you can still do it, or have you surprised yourself in new ways?
Well, I think for me, painting has to take. I mean, I suppose we're talking a lot about security, and I think that, really painting has to take you outside that every time. Like, you always have to be working at the limit of your ability, or the limit of your knowledge. You have to always be testing something and going somewhere you don't know where you are. You've always got to be there. If you're just producing it, then it's not art, I suppose. It's production, and the job really is to locate yourself beyond what you already know, because I think the language of painting, particularly the way I'm sort of painting now, is that it has to tap into something you can't articulate and you can't sort of reduce to things already existent in your, whether it's just a different way of talking about consciousness or familiarity or anything like that, but it has to be something beyond that. And that happens through painting itself. It happens through actually making the work. It's not something you can kind of cultivate intellectually. It's something you have to, for me anyway, you have to sort of physically go through, and you have to sort of paint through it. And that's that's the kind of that's where you end up, is something that you don't that takes you beyond into something new, and that you can't really resolve. I guess my job really is always about preparing new problems and trying to paint back out of them towards something true, like something that feels like a fact, and looks back at me in a way that is about recognition and alienation all at once. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, it does. It sounds like you like a challenge and you seek to be challenged by your work. I feel like, before I wanted to come back to that, but the show that we're talking about is at Pace Gallery in London, opening next week, and it's there until January.
Yeah.
How many pieces are in the show, just to get a sense of how many you've been working on?
So that's like 7 large paintings and probably the same kind of number of works on paper, because which is really a kind of huge amount for me. I mean, it's not like the paintings take. I mean, I used to be a very labor-intensive artist, at the beginning, and it's gradually become looser and broader and bigger and more expansive in terms of speed and handling.
Is that to do with confidence in yourself?
It is, but it's also confidence as a factor of maturity and growth. So I would say. So really, and what else is in your life too. So early on, you're kind of like, you've only got that really. You've only got your work. You don't have the confidence to know where it's all going. Later on, you've got many more elements in your life, but you've also got more confidence and more security in the language and where it's going, and an audience, and the support for a large gallery, and all of these things that contribute to, what the world around the work looks like. So, it would be strange, I think, to paint the same type of work all the way through, because even your mechanisms, your physical kind of relationship to even your fitness and your reach and your tolerance and boredom thresholds and all of these things all change, and they all kind of evolve, and the people in your life affect that. So the work, it tends to be a bit like weather. It has its own sort of climate, and it changes into something else almost without my say so. And sometimes you get to a point where you think, wow, I'm here. How am I doing this? And you look back at what you've made and you think, this is just always evolving, because that's what we do as people, isn't it? We become different types of people all the time. And I think that's what I meant by fact, really. It's like, it has to feel like me. I have to look at it and feel like that's what it feels like to be alive in some way. It has to be honest. And I guess, that openness, it comes a lot from wanting to share more about the process, but also what in that process is about failure and collapse as well as things working out. There's something, your tolerance for covering your tracks and perfecting things disappears. I mean, I'm 50 next year, so somehow around this age, you kind of you mistrust production values which are about refinement. I'm more drawn to the idea of an experience which is more complicated and has elements of difficulty and disaster involved, as well as soaring sort of virtuoso moments. I kind of like the whole spectrum of what it means to try and put something together. I think that's the experience I want to feel when I look at it, the crash and burn bit, as well as the bit that sort of you don't know how you pulled it off. That to me is what life feels like almost all the time. You're always kind of you get more blind and more clueless the more experienced and responsible you get in a way, and the more responsibilities that gather around you, the more you feel like showing that it's a kind of natural, I don't know, there's a natural balance between being not in control and being on top of things. And I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really interesting the way that you talk about your process and how it comes out on the page, and that you feel like you need it to feel like true to who you are. I mean, when do you get a sense of that when you're painting? Is there a point when you feel like that's it, or are you constantly working on it and it's not coming through? Or
yeah, it's funny that, because I think it sort of dawned on me about 10 years ago that I was the problem in the work. That that I was the issue. That if only less of me was making it. It's almost like I'm quite. I had to kind of retrain my judgment and expectations around it. And I think what I mean by that is that the finishing of it is a sort of falsehood. The idea of I had to sort of learn to give away the end part, let it go, and just not try and be in control of stuff, because more interesting things seem to happen then. When I was reduced, if my role was reduced, the better the paintings looked, or the more exciting they looked. And when they looked more exciting, then I felt like another part of me was waking up. When it makes you think, well, actually, who is it being addressed to? Who is it for? Who is the finishing it for? And how does it feel? Even physically, is your arm aching? Is it boring? Is it going on way too long? And why should it? What are those things about? Where do they come from? Maybe it comes from early life. Maybe it comes from school habits. Maybe it comes from other things. Maybe it comes from anxiety or expectation or some other things. So you think, well, what's the opposite of that? What happens if I just set that free, or just stop and just live with it for a month, 6 months, a year, whatever it is, and just see how it looks in that time, and try and learn a different way of looking at it as though I didn't make it.
So you're talking about you're putting less and less of your ego into the work, reducing it.
Yeah, and just thinking, actually, some of the incidents that happen along the way, it's a bit like cropping a very long movie. Like you say, well, you want to round off the story at the end, but actually, what happens if it's just the bit where nothing's happening? What is the bit that you want to live in? And say, well, let's just hold it there rather than try to tie it all off and finish things away. And because maybe that's the part that is shutting other people out. Like the bit that's refining it it's somehow. I think what I learned from exhibiting, my work shifted quite dramatically in 2019, and I went to New York for a spell to try and break the sort of cycle of. I think I found that I reached a bit of a cul-de-sac with my work, and I left London around 2005. So I was always looking to work away from the art world in a quite isolated way. So that was established then, and the 2019 moment was, I suppose, looking for a different type of energy in the painting and trying to find try and draw out an essence that had joined up everything until then. What was the bit that made all of it, would connect all of it, and try and just say, paint that.
Was there something that happened in your life at that moment that was making you feel like that, or was it purely a work-related
It's sort of both,
problem?
I guess. I mean, it was probably an age thing a little, but I suppose I hit this point where I wasn't sort of, I didn't, they're talking about the idea of it being a true, or a fact that you're looking at, a true thing, something that feels like you. Well, I was looking at the paintings and thought, this doesn't feel like how it feels. It doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel true. It's kind of well done, or the execution is getting more and more sophisticated. But that execution I'm sort of drowning in it a bit. I thought, what I want to do is, there's another side to how I'm starting to feel that I want to harness. So I felt like I had to get away from my sort of habitual arena and try and see how it looked somewhere else, which turned out to be New York. Try to make the work there. And in the end, what it was is it began to feel quite more provincial when I saw it there. And I realized I was looking for something more universal, that as actually the handling, there was a way to make something which would connect to maybe more people, maybe more sort of experience in the world, maybe a different way of looking at what painting was. But I had to, in a way, shake off something habitual about what it meant to create an image, something kind of innate about where you end up when you start a painting.
What does a provincial image look like versus a universal image? I like that idea.
I suppose I guess I've been trying to define that for a while, and I suppose I'm using the word provincial in terms of a European DNA of image making that is based upon the figure. And if you think about other cultures and other societies and other sort of approaches to image making, art making, and writing and drawing, even the idea that you write from left to right, or that you are making images based on and human beings, it's not the same the world over. There's not, there isn't the same sort of canon. And I guess in a way, being raised in the UK, you're being fed by essentially a religious, a Christian at that, iconography, which is based upon the Holy Family and, these figures having these experiences. If you look at art from other continents, it's predicated on completely different sort of disciplines and ways of organizing images, and what images are fed from and what they are attributed to varies hugely the world over. But I'd never really looked at my own sort of artistic upbringing, if we call it that, in terms of this dominance of this figure. And, I'm interested in making my work universal, which is like it, in a way, I suppose I boiled it down to a linear component. The figurative aspect of my work was worn very heavily. So being in New York, I managed to attribute this somehow to a European figurative tradition based upon religious iconography. That I think that's what feeds all of the art that I was raised on through college and university, school, and whatever. That you paint dramatic images of figures, and that comes from something, that comes from the culture. Whereas I sort of worked out that if I focus it on line, then actually you suddenly let in all sorts of other associations about image making. You leave the figure in there, the figure is there, still very much in there, but it isn't the central concept of what that space is about. It's as much about handwriting and abstraction and character and touch as it is about figure and space or narrative or whatever else, which all those things are all equalized in these paintings. And that's the thing that I felt that drew it towards a more universal place, that drew it towards something with multiple access points, that wasn't always about this gravitational and very sort of heavy laden sort of figure composition tradition, I suppose.
And did being in New York help you arrive at that realization? I mean, were you looking at artists out there and their more abstract work?
Yeah, I think it's in a way it's as simple as that, because if you think about the tradition of abstract expressionism and the individuals that created that, a lot of first generation Jewish immigrants, their image tradition is entirely different in terms of the figure, in terms of figures of divinity, which, obviously there's the prohibition on creating graven images that is part of Judaism, and you realize perhaps abstract expressionism wouldn't have been possible in any other continent, any other time, with any other group of people. And it was just something that I felt instinctively drawn to as a way of sort of breaking the cycle of something that I felt I'd been burdened with, and making images in New York, going down to Museum of Modern Art every day, working in the same area as those artists were, just walking the streets, and then coming back to a studio to see my thing. That's what sort of gave it the provincial feel. I thought, this looks extremely British, never mind European or whatever else I'm saying. It just feels like I just wanted this to feel less grounded in place. And I guess that is all about a sense of elevation. I wanted them to literally lift off the ground and be airborne and be able to travel, through time and space in someone's mind, and not just be sort of sat on the earth and heavy. And I think in a way, just on a more practical level, it's why the paintings eventually started to sort of break up on the lower third of them. They reveal the actual making in the lower third of the painting. There's a lot of linen comes through, a lot of early marks are visible.
So you're painting on linen? Painting
on sort of raw linen. And towards the bottom of the painting, it slowly starts to sort of break up, because it really gives the painting this sense of lift. And I think that comes from then, is that feeling like I wanted, in a sense, the terra firma to evaporate, the terra firma that these come from, to sort of fall away and then just almost just float, so you could almost attach them anywhere in time and space. And I think that somehow New York, Manhattan, an island, very much sort of heavy with buildings and dense with people, strangely gave me that sense of lift, and I've sort of carried that forward ever since, really.
Well, it's a very sort of upward.
Yeah.
Isn't it?
It's very vertical.
Yeah, very vertical.
Yeah, place. That's true.
Where were you working and when you were there?
Well, it was sort of, it was between Chelsea and Soho, and but I sort of obviously spent a lot of time wandering about, retracing steps of other people, famous stories of painters and the rest of it. Just trying to feed off something else. But it was a print studio in Paste Prints, and I originally began making a series of prints with them, which were, in a way, the kind of workshop of all the paintings that had gone before. I was trying to sort of unpick and reverse engineer all of my images. So I started off just doing almost bootlegs of my own pictures, try and repaint them, print them, and then start again, just to see how they were made and why, what kept coming back and what I didn't like. It was trying to sort of annoy myself into not doing certain things, reprint it and over again. So what's the thing that bugs you the most about this? And then she said, well, just take that away, until you end up with just nothing. Until, in a way, each painting was reduced to a line. So what do I like about the line? Is it the fact that it's curved, or there's another one next to it? And what do they suggest? And it makes you see that actually, well, that part is ambiguous, but it isn't vague because it comes from the drawing. You say, well, actually, how do you make an abstract painting that isn't just pushing mud around on a surface like a fool? It's I don't want to do that. I want the work to still be about something. I wanted it to be about something, in a way, all my work is really about what it means to be a thinking being, and to look at something, what it means to have something inside and something outside, and how do they connect? How is the painting the thing that's the bridge between the outside world and your private inner life? What is it to have an inner life but also look at things and how they feed into it and back and forth between each other? So in a way, by sort of breaking down all my paintings, sort of literally ripping them up and putting them back together again, I started to learn a way of saying, actually, this is, what it is a network. It's like a neural network, but also a growing network. Like these lines are all about how we're built inside, but also how the world we look at is built too. And it allows me to move like between sort of descriptions of form, but then also just connectivities as well, which could be about connectivities between people, but also nerve endings between plants that you look at, and then the structure of the brain that apprehends that structure and understands what it is. So in a way, I'm sort of thinking about things like that. I'm thinking about what it is that makes makes it feel like everything. What sort of image feels like everything? Doesn't feel so very specific, but doesn't feel like nothing. And that's the sort of challenge I'm trying to kind of work around. But I've sort of drawn it out of figuration. I'm painting a figure and then sort of sack the figure, like send him away, and just see what's left. So it's a way of like, in a way, like even with the question of whether the figure is male or female is too much. It's too oppositional, binary, whatever. Like it has to be about everything. It has to be about every option of who you are and where you are. And I think, the fact that I've sort of always made figurative paintings in a quite virtuoso, in inverted commas, way, or at least they've striven towards being skillful and highly rendered and descriptive. I'm just fascinated by the idea, if you still paint like that, but there's nobody there, what is that? What are you actually left with? And I think that connectivity is like painting figures in their connection with each other without them being even present. So I think that's what I've ended up with.
Wow.
If that makes any sense.
No, it does. It does. I'm just really enjoying how well you are expressing the ideas. What do you start with then when you're faced with a blank canvas? I read on Pace has published some words you wrote to accompany the exhibition. So the exhibition, which is called Atlas with Butterfly, and at one point in the text you mentioned how you were inspired by looking at some pelicans landing on the water on a beach. But I'm interested in how you get from an initial idea and what you start with, and then how that then evolves into what you've just been talking about.
Yeah, I suppose what happens is nowadays I'm drawn to things that I don't really understand, like something. I'm sort of enthralled with my own fascination. Like if something fascinates me, I just trust it because I know it will kind of help me through something. It'll help me through. It'll be a kind of sign of what I'm trying to get out of the painting in some way. It's like a clue. And because I don't want the subject to be, the subject is not something that is something I can write about straight away or describe. It's not like this is about, experience of this, this person in a room or something. It's about energy, more likely, or action and nature that makes me think, I don't know why that's jarring, or I don't know why that's kind of sending some sort of shockwave into my sort of brain that makes me want to make some sort of image. So I'm kind of like, it's curiosity that pulls me forward.
Have you always liked a challenge?
Yeah.
You like to be challenged. You don't like the easy life.
No, I don't like the easy life because I kind of think that I think what I'm looking for is something that comes from a place beyond understanding, and when I because that makes me vulnerable. And I think that it's the vulnerability and the struggling within the image that creates a sort of force, a sort of a tension between understanding and struggle. And I think when I say struggle, I'm not talking about a kind of hard work. I'm talking more about things falling apart and things tailing off. It's a more passive idea, really. And the thing about seeing the pelican in Miami was that it was like I was looking at the scene, which was tranquil and beautiful. It's like something you could relate to art very easily. The colours and the organisation of space. It was like art was already done. Art was already there. And anybody's idea of art would be sort of furnished by whatever was there. But when the pelican sort of intruded, sort of crashed into that, it was the idea that actually it's the disruption of your expectation that really counts. It's like it's not what you think you're going to do that matters. And in the answer to the idea of what do you do with a blank canvas, it's like, well, you have to sort of destroy it. You have to have something that disrupts your expectation or your plan, or the thing you thought you were going to do is the thing that is wrong. And the thing that happens is the thing that you didn't expect. But because of that, because of the way it intrudes on the scene, in the pelican's case, a beautifully sort of, orchestrated sunset or whatever, and in the studio sense, immaculate black canvas, you have to sort of, the disruption is a sign of something eternal and prehistoric, and it's something from deep time in a way. It's like animals and drives and creatures surviving that just do what they need to do beyond the thing you're trying to see and retrieve from what you can see, beyond the thing that you think is the art, which isn't the art, which is just the conscious appropriation of rightness and perfection, which is actually that's the falsehood that you're trying to paint out of. That's the thing that you've always got to get away from so that you can get to the art. You've got to be the thing which is primordial and breaking through that lazy human join the dots mentality. The selfie opportunity on Miami Beach, which is so seductive. And, the beautiful painting that could then come from it, which is using all your skill. You don't need that either. You need to go through something. And, when you go through something, you connect more with that, with what that animal has always done since the dawn of time, with that energy. And it's that, not since the dawn of time, since the dawn of pelicans, maybe. Yeah. But, the energy of life, not the hollow payoffs of retinal kind of perfection. And I think that's the thing. But you sort of need a bit of both. It's a tension between the two. You're not turning yourself into an idiot and just daubing it on. It's about the conversation between the two things in a way. But the conversation between your conscious mind and your unknowing, primitive and sort of more instinctive response mechanisms and things. And I think that there's that tension I'm trying to get to really with the images.
I'm getting a lot of tension and tension and challenges.
Yeah, I keep saying that word tension. I mean, I suppose in a way that that's the expression I've always tried to get. Like I think with whatever my images have been over the last 25 years or whatever it is, they're always about sort of compressions, I suppose, between dualities, like the tension between this and that, and that point between the two is the thing that I find interesting. When they meet and collide, when there's a collision, I find there's something fascinating. And I guess I've reduced that down to, the conscious mind or the predetermined mind and the unconscious one, or the inside and the outside, the known and the unknown. And that's that flashpoint between the two is where the painting kind of tries to operate.
When you were in New York, what took you away from there, and how long did you stay there, and how did you get from there to where you are here in Canterbury?
Well, the studio was here, sort of waiting. I've had this place for a good 15 years, and I was only there for like a summer. It was long enough for me to make essentially paintings on paper, but it was long enough for me to make something that I knew I could then build into paintings back in the studio. I mean, it's once I've managed to shake off and find something new, once I managed to sort of shed something and find a way through that was, I don't know, I could feel it could be expanded. I brought back all the work I'd made there and just started to put it back together here, like try and continue with the same type of work, and even ritualistically, like using the same materials and things that I used in New York. I just recreated that space here, and just to see how things would kind of move forward, and create certain rules for myself too. Like originally it was like reduce everything down to a single color, fix each thing on, each image on one proportion, one size for each painting, and just try and work within limitations so that I could kind of like control and understand what was happening, and and just be more restricted in terms of what the painting, or where it could go, and so it could hold the line and not be sort of not deviate, and not be seduced back into something else once I was here. So I kind of put certain limitations on it when I got back, and then gradually allowed those things to fall away, so that the language became a kind of fully formed painterly world of its own, based upon what I sort of picked up when I was in New York.
And do you feel like you function most productively when you've got those self-imposed rules?
Not so much now. I think I was more worried about falling back into bad habits at the time.
Bad habits in terms of your work?
Yeah, that I would sort of, because it's quite, it's intimidating making art, and it's uncomfortable.
Yeah, I bet.
And on a sort of dark November afternoon or something, you might think, oh no, I don't, particularly when your work is new, you're doing something you've never shown before. You might think, oh, I might just slip a bit more of that back in that I know works, and
comfort zone.
There is a danger of that with artists, because you're alone. You've only got yourself. So I had to sort of put up lots of artificial little tricks so that I wouldn't give in to that, and I could just sort of hold. I mean, at first it was like the painting had to be done in one day, and then I had to stop just so that I'd have something to look at, and then I gradually relaxed that rule until there was some work around me, and none of those made it into any exhibitions, because they were just exercises. But in fact, that's been a big part of it as well, is that knowing that learning when to leave things and not sort of not work, but also not conceive of things as part of an exhibition or anything in the wider world, and just allow it to live in the studio for long enough, and then make the judgments on it until enough work builds up, so that you make a selection of what you've done. It's a different way of thinking about the studio, because originally you go, well, there's this space, the walls are this big, I'll make this, and you generally kind of, in the past I used to just make the amount of work for the show, and when I came back to the studio it was empty. But now you kind of think, well, that would be good in a different show, that works really well on its own, or these two things, that was a different train of thought, I'll keep that for a different time. And then the thing about the theme of the show starts to grow around a smaller group, and you realize that actually it's usually to do with a trip overseas. Because when I'm overseas, like the example of the Pelican in Miami, that I was making watercolors on this beach, and I always make little watercolors when I'm overseas and bring them back as these little books, like there's a stack of them here. They're like a little diary, And in a way, that's where the word atlas sort of comes from for the name of the show. It's like they're little atlases of places, but in my language. They're not topographies. They're like brainscapes from that place that I have managed to get down on paper. And some of the awkwardness of having to paint in certain weather conditions. I mean, sometimes they're up mountains, sometimes they're in hot countries, sometimes they're in busy places. There's often a sort of awkwardness to doing these things, getting little brushes and things out in public. It's embarrassing, weird, the weather doesn't help. But that awkwardness gets into the lines and into the forms, and I often try and carry that forward back here too, so they become little capsules of the place. So that when the work sometimes takes its own direction, then the idea forms of quite a poetic relationship to place. And that's, Atlas with butterfly kind of means to me like the idea of like the Titan holding up the earth, a heavy, difficult thing, a burden, but then a book being full of places with a butterfly not being heavy. So is it a butterfly landing on an open book of places, or is it the Titan holding up something which is weightless? So again, it's little contradictions about weight and burden, about place, travel, and the idea of the earth, all sort of folded into each other in a way that isn't quite sensical, but has a sort of rhyming logic of its own, which is what I think my paintings are about. They're about, like I said at the top, about taking away the figure in a figurative painting. It doesn't really make any sense, but there's a certain rhyming logic to how, when you see them, colours and space are organised anyway. There is something real about it. There is something kind of rational in there. But it's just that the front end has been stripped away. The bit that you finally say you know what you're looking at is just pulled away. And I think the things I write are a bit like that too. It's like, I'm not painting about pelicans in Miami. It's like that's an everyday sight in Miami, like seagulls are here in Kent and Whitstable, It's more like, what does it mean to sort of look at something in a way that's informed by these paintings and then just chase that for its own sake into forms and things which in your head as the artist, in its private space, in the private space of your own skull, make their own kind of sense. And then when you see the paintings grow and form, a bit like, things in a Petri dish, you're gradually seeing something take form. And then at the end of that process, closer to an exhibition, you say, actually, that is somehow about that pelican moment or about that mountain moment or whatever it was in the sketchbook and the drawings. And it all comes together and you realise, oh, yeah, that was all that. That was all one thing. And then you have an exhibition.
How are you feeling about those paintings that you've just sent up to London?
Well, I mean, I think the key is always, if you feel uncomfortable, you must be doing something right, because you must be sharing something with yourself, which is, you're at risk. And if you're at risk, then maybe you push something. And if you've done that, there's a chance you've made a good painting. But I don't know yet. I mean,
do you feel quite vulnerable when you must?
Oh, yeah. It's sort of awful.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a bit, it's a bit like actors who say that they get nervous every time. It's like, you would say, why do it? But because you forget that and you go back and you think it won't be like that. But yeah, you do, I find it very uncomfortable. Most certainly. It's because it's very revealing. I mean, there's a reason why people don't do stuff like that normally, because it's weird. It's like, why would you do it?
There's a bravery to it, and it takes a lot of hard work and dedication, I imagine. It feels quite isolated.
Yeah.
This space, this building you're in.
Yeah, it is isolated.
Is that presumably on purpose, or you like to be somewhere fairly remote?
As remote as possible. I mean, this is as remote as I can manage now at this time of life with an actual life. It can't just completely go. But, and I wouldn't want to really. But in terms of the work around the space around the paintings, it has to be isolated, because it has to feel a bit like its own planet in a way. Like it has to feel like the interior of my own head.
So you don't work with assistants or?
Yeah, I mean, I have them sporadically, but they don't really do anything with the painting. at all. They help create the bubble around the painting. They get rid of the things that would distract, the everyday things, like maintaining the site or the admin and the, just the running of life things that go on around. They try and take those away so that it's just this. They never pick up paintbrushes or do that, but they make sure that the paint is in the right place and the place is neat and ready to go so that these things can happen.
And do you work all day, or do you tend to just do bits and bobs? I mean, do you have a routine?
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to break the routine a lot. I mean, there's a certain time in life when you can only really have a routine. Obviously, with young kids and the rest of it, now everyone's a lot older. I feel like I can come and go a bit more and more drawn to a random schedule.
You mean your children are older? They're in their teens and early 20s.
Yeah, they sort of don't need you in that sort of 9 to 5. The ends of the day are different. So I find that I like to kind of come in and surprise things here a bit, like to be taken by surprise by my own work, have little breaks from it, and then come in at night or in early or weird times so that it doesn't feel like I have to actually do anything. I think the key is to try and break the idea that when you're here you have to work. Often that's the worst thing you can do. Time spent in front of the painting is not necessarily time well spent. It can be, the opposite of that. It can, time looking and living with it is more important, and being here and absorbing them and thinking about what's happening is more important. Often I find that the response to something on the canvas is to start another one. I mean, what happens mostly here is that I try not to paint. I try and start another painting, pursue the same thing. If I think something's got to an interesting point, I'll say, well, just pause that, start it again and reverse the colours or reverse that or expand the forms and see where that goes. So you have like 4 or 5 different options hanging around one thing, and then things will wither off and then it'll go down one route. But that's all about breaking up routine, really. That's about not feeling like time is too precious here. Like you get through the door, you've got to get the brush in your hand and get on with it. That's bad. That's usually pretty bad for painting, I think.
So there's no middle-aged routine for you?
No.
Settling down, it's like the opposite.
It's the opposite, yeah. I feel sort of like, a bit beyond that, really. Like, I think what I'm trying to establish now is a certain type of freedom to sort of look at the painting in a variety of ways that aren't just about execution. That's the thing, is to be more ritualistic around them. And working on them is one factor in that, but it's not the only one. Travel has become much more important in terms of nourishing the studio sort of, or I don't like to use the word practice, but whatever it is, the studio behaviour, I think it has to be fed by novelty. And
do you travel a lot?
Yeah, I mean, within reason. I mean, I would like there to be other studios elsewhere, really, eventually. I think that's what I'm kind of working towards, is that...
Maybe one back in New York, or...
Yeah, or, sort of... I go a lot to an island in Spain called Formentera, where I've sort of I get a lot, it's sort of like a kind of muse relationship to that place, and I kind of get a lot of my forms and inspiration from there. And a lot of my drawing books are kind of all originate there too. So there's something happens there that is different to what happens here. So I'd be quite interested to see what would happen if there was, 6 blank canvases in another location, and you just go there for a week, see what happens, and then come back and don't go for another month, and just see what you leave behind in each place and how they build up. I'm kind of interested in that, like in what the place does to your arm, I suppose, that your hand and eye, what it does, what the light and the climate do to your choices, to see what comes out. I guess I'm looking to be surprised by my own painting.
You're quite demanding of your own work.
I think so. Yeah, I think I think it's, you don't ever be bored, and you don't ever want to be. I think all of my work is about a sense of dare and a sense of what if. Like, is it possible? It's never like, oh, that's working, I'll keep doing it. It's more like, is that possible? And sometimes doing it again is the dare. Like, what happens if I just do a show of yellow paintings? That, the repetition can be the dare as much as the change. But I'm always looking for what of a new problem, I guess. I suppose painting is a problem because we've always, as a species, we've always painted since someone blew pigment across their hand on a cave wall and then removed the hand to leave a negative print. Ever since that sort of instinct, I suppose that instinct is just a way of making tolerable the business of being indoors, which without painting, I don't understand how you could be trapped inside a house for very long. I mean, box sets and movies, yeah, that's fantastic, but it's a kind of way of going on an adventure without having to actually go outside. But ideally, I would like this all to be outdoors. It feels like it's about being outdoors, really, for me, in a sense, like, and the way of making being inside more interesting. So I don't know if that answers anything or is related to the question.
I think you answered all of that and more. You've been listening to In Talks with me, Danielle Radojcin. The sound and theme music is by Woolby Productions and the artwork is by Patrick Wall. If you enjoyed this episode, please pass it on to someone who you think might also like it. Please subscribe and leave a review. To pitch for guest ideas, you can DM me via my socials at Danielle Radojcin. Thanks for listening.